So Diane, last time we saw you was the Eastleigh by-election, and now you've got your sights set on a much bigger election, the European election.
That's correct.
How are you feeling about your MEP candidacy?
Well, all of the candidates went through a very, very exhaustive process that UKIP deployed. So to give you some idea, there was over 300 people, obviously all party members, who applied to become potential MEP candidates. That was whittled down to the initial 200. Then we went through, as I say, a very, very exhaustive process. And we got to a final list of 60. But ultimately, it was the members who decided who the final candidates would be and the order that they would go into the elections as candidates for. And so after all that process, which took some weeks, I'm currently number 3 in the southeast for UKIP. Ahead of me is the party leader, Nigel Farage. Not unsurprisingly, he did very, very well,
yes,
across all of the tests, and particularly in the members' ballot. Then a lady called Janice Atkinson is in number 2. Myself, Diane James, in number 3. And then in number 4 is actually Ray Finch, who is leader of the UKIP opposition group here at Hampshire County Council. So another person very much on your doorstep. So
are you feeling quite honoured to be
Oh,
elected?
Absolutely. I mean, this, first of all, to put, what's before us in context, we're going to be carrying a party torch into the European Parliament, so that's both in Brussels and in Strasbourg. There's a great sense of expectation that more and more parties in more and more European countries are taking a similar stance to that of UKIP. And I'm excluding, categorically at this stage, the really what I call right-wing extremists. But, clearly the whole EU experiment, the whole EU Parliament, the whole EC system is under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of question, and therefore I'm hoping myself and others will be joining en masse, to fight for the sort of issues that we represent here in the UK.
So how do you think UKIP are going to fare in the European election?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I'm going to answer it in 2 ways. My own personal view is I think we're going to do very, very well. All of the media, mainstream media, they're forecasting and predicting also that UKIP is going to do very well. And when I say very well, at least 3 potentially, and I think a very, very reasonable chance of 4 from the southeast compared to 2 previously. But of course that recognises and means a huge amount of pressure on the party and on the candidates to deliver and to perform. Because clearly if we don't deliver according to expectations and predictions, there are going to be those out there that are going to say, it's all over and done with for UKIP, and it will have a bearing on how they perceive we'll do in 2015 in the general election here in the UK.
So do you think it'll be quite damaging to your party if you don't do well in this election?
I wouldn't say it will be damaging by any means, but I would like to see a minimum of 4 from the southeast. And to give you some idea of how we're feeling about it in the party, a lady called Marta Andreasen, who you may recall defected from UKIP to the Tories during the Eastleigh campaign, she's in number 4 position for the Conservatives. We would be absolutely delighted as a party if we returned 4 MEPs for the South-East, because that means ultimately that Marta wouldn't get back in, and that would be, that would give us a good feeling, I think.
So it'd be almost on a personal level, that one?
For some, I'm sure. For some, I'm sure.
Okay, so as an anti-Europe party, would you not say as an MEP it would be morally right for you to deny payment from Europe? Is it not going against your belief to take payment from Europe for your job?
Can you just explain what you're meaning by that? Are you meaning the sort of personal allowances that we're all allowed to receive?
For your personal allowances, you're being paid by Europe, but you're anti-Europe. Would it not be a moral stance to just turn around and go, no, I won't be paid by Europe?
Well, if I extrapolate your argument there, you could equally then say we shouldn't be standing at all. Well, the whole fundamental aspect of democracy is to say that parties that represent people's views and people's voting intentions, they have a rightful position in the European Parliament. Now, thinking back to the question you just posed to me, we're anticipating between 25 and 35% of the population will vote for UKIP because they want to send that message to Europe that they don't believe that the future is the sort of EU model and such, and they need the representation from the UK that UKIP represents to actually deliver that, because none of the other three political parties, although they say one thing, not a single one of them will actually deliver or agree or even put forward what UKIP is promoting.
Is it not slightly counterintuitive to be approaching as an MEP when you're actually so thoroughly against Europe?
No, not at all. I don't agree, because if you, again, I would extrapolate that if you take that stance, then similar parties across the European countries that have a similar sentiment in terms of intention and what they represent in terms of political stance, they shouldn't be there either. The whole point at the moment of the European model is that there's a huge amount of questioning as to whether it's fit for purpose still, whether 50 years plus after it was founded, is it the right model to go forward to represent the European countries. UKIP happens to believe that it isn't, so do a number of other countries, and the only way we can highlight that and activate to make sure that it is dissolved, that would be UKIP's obviously ideal scenario, or at least that we withdraw from it ultimately. The only way to achieve that is to get representation in Brussels and Strasbourg.
Okay, so circling back to Eastleigh.
Yep.
When you're in the sort of during the by-election, what did you think the people of Eastleigh's view was on Europe? Were they particularly anti-Europe? Did they really support UKIP on that?
Well, clearly they must have supported the UKIP stance on that, because they had the option to say, let's believe some of the other rhetoric and some of the other promotions in terms of the other political campaigns that some of the other individuals who represented Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, plus others, were putting forward. I think my view would be that, and it's something that I made a point of a number of times during the campaign, was that we did not have to explain the link between the EU and the problems that individuals were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Literally within days into the campaign, people were telling us, and all we were doing as a party, and in terms of the activists that were out there on a daily basis, and myself at the hustings and such, we were just, if you like, squaring that circle and just, reminding and reiterating that the only party that was making that link and wanted to do something about it fundamentally was UKIP.
So you think the people of Eastleigh overall are quite keen to leave Europe?
Well, I can only go by the fact that, near just short of 28% voted for UKIP. They understood the message. They, as I say, were making that link themselves. We didn't have to do a huge amount of convincing or campaigning. At the time, the Conservative candidate was also trying to take a similar message. She was explaining about immigration and such. It was really only the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party that didn't make that link. Now, we still take the view that nearly 30% plus of voters had not voted for a long, long time, and they chose to vote for us. So we were appealing on two platforms, if you like. One, we were making that link between the problems that people had and the EU membership, and that appealed to both individuals who might have voted for other parties but were coming to us because they knew that the other parties wouldn't deliver accordingly. But there was also that cohort of voters out there that recognised we were the only party that would actually deliver what they felt was necessary.
Okay, and say you're successful in the European election, and in the future you get your long-term goal of leaving Europe. What then? What is UKIP going to give people that, other than the fact that you're trying to get us to leave Europe, are you going to be addressing the economic problems or the energy prices, for example? Okay,
I think if you look at what's happened to UKIP since February, we have taken on board fully that we need to do more to start promoting and developing our policies, and we've ticked both of those boxes. I have a fellow MEP candidate called Tim Aker. He's in the east of England. He is our dedicated policy developer, if you like, and he's put a huge amount of work in the last few months and is really developing some seriously good policies. And we're choosing to roll those out as and when it suits us as a party. I was asked by a BBC journalist yesterday, why weren't we doing it, yet more to articulate what we felt about certain issues, and energy was one, and defence was another, and such. And I made the point that at the moment it's what I call a real battle between Labour and Conservatives. And I would actually, it's a personal view on behalf of the party, I'm quite happy sitting there and watching these two big parties try and almost battle it out, thump it out between each other. And why should we enter the fray at this stage and give away very, very good ideas? But if I take something that has happened literally in the last 24 hours, this absolutely ridiculous situation whereby Jeremy Hunt's announced that a certain amount of money foreigners might pay towards their healthcare. We're much, much more pragmatic. It's no good once people are here trying to get them to pay. What we're saying, at point of entry, you must have a health insurance policy in place which will cover any healthcare needs that you have, and social needs for that matter, social services needs. Now that's a much, much better approach. And if I explain very quickly why, for many years now, you have to identify yourself before you enter the USA, who you are for security checks and whatever, and prove that you have the means to actually enter and survive in the US. If they can do it, a much, much easier system, there's no reason why the UK couldn't.
People are obviously voting for you because a big reason is because of Europe and the EU. Mm-hmm. But are they not going in slightly blind? Other than the EU, they don't actually really know what they're voting for. They don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I think that, first of all, you're making, if you don't mind, I'm not sure if you're confusing two aspects. We've got the general election in May 2015. At that point, which is well over 18 months away, that's plenty of time for UKIP to roll out its policies that relate to the national position and to put that in contention for potential voters to consider versus the Conservatives.
So you're planning to make it quite clear by the general election?
Absolutely, yes. It will be absolutely abundantly clear. The issue at the moment, and the one, the immediate target is May the 22nd next year, 2014, which is the EU elections. And that is a much, much easier, shall we say, or more simpler platform for voters to select their party of choice. It is very much between, I believe, the Europhile and the Eurosceptic party. And if you look at the national polls over the last few months, some report nearly 3/4, consistently though, well over into the late 50% of the population is saying we don't want to stay in Europe. So that's a very, very clear message. Liberal Democrats have made their position very, very clear, as apologise for repeating clear, but they don't want a referendum. They won't support it. Labour has yet to come off the shelf in terms of a decision one way or another. It's only the Conservatives who, of course, have pushed this into the long grass, or to use that lovely American phrase. They're kicking it in, down the street, the tin down the street. They're saying in 2017, but caveated by if David Cameron has majority party government, if he's Prime Minister, etc., etc. So there's too many ifs. And so in terms of the UKIP position, we're clearly, what you see is what you get. Conservatives are saying you've got to wait till 2017 before you get what you see. Liberal Democrats is a definitive no. Labour haven't made a decision yet. So I think that, in terms of clarity for voters, is a very, very important position to have.
Okay, so moving away from the issue of Europe, UKIP have been in the media a lot more over the last few months. Your profile has risen massively, but not always for the best reasons. For example, the Godfrey Bloom and the slut incident.
Yes.
What was your take on that?
Well, I hope you did see that I went on the mainstream media very soon after that happened. I had actually been booked to talk to the BBC at 3:30. And I was booked, and I was actually going to talk about the conference. I wasn't necessarily anticipating what was going to happen with Godfrey. What I chose to do, with the party's support, was to talk to voters in terms of what had happened and how I felt about it, because I believed that how I felt reflected what the vast majority of people and voters out there would have thought, which was the use of the word slut was demeaning. It may have come about in a very innocent sense from Godfrey's point of view, but for the vast majority of people out there, they couldn't see, should we say, the historical context. It was bordering on offensive this time round, and quite clearly, the aspect of tapping Michael Crick on the nose with, or on the face with a conference brochure, not the ideal situation. So, you know, regretfully that did happen. The party had to react to that. It did spoil the conference. We've made no secret of that. We haven't tried to cover that up. But I think what is probably much more important is the way that Nigel Farage and Steve Crowther dealt with it. It was very, very decisive in terms of the steps they took. None of this waffling around that some of the other party leaders tend to do with their individuals. And so I'm satisfied that it was dealt in the right way. And I would remind you that at the moment there are 4 MPs out there across the parties, all of whom have resigned the party whip. You know, Eric Joyce for thumping somebody, all the scandals surrounding Mr. Hancock down in Portsmouth, Patrick Mercer almost for a cash payment for lobbying type aspects. Now, I don't think any of those should still be in Parliament. And if we can show that by the way in which we treated and dealt with Godfrey, and he seems to be okay about that, he's understood the reasons, I think that's shown decisive and good leadership versus the other party leaders that are quite happy to say, oh, we'll keep them in the party, albeit they would resign the whip temporarily.
So you're going to be quite strict with your members. You're not going to let any, because I think this is what people are quite worried about, is that there are the occasional extremist views within UKIP. Are you going to keep them in line?
That is everyone's hope. Nobody can say, looking into the future, that it might or it could not happen. What I would say, if I go back to the MEP selection process, is that the quality of the process that was used to identify and then decide on the candidates going forward, I believe the likelihood of something happening along the lines of Godfrey Bloom is now extremely remote, if non-existent.
Okay, and also in the press there was a lot of talk about sort of a possibility of a teaming up between UKIP and the Conservatives, which obviously Cameron and Osborne did shoot down sort of immediately. Yep. Would that have been something you would have supported, though?
No, it isn't something I support, and I'm happy to go on record, probably for the 3rd or 4th time in as many weeks. I don't believe that's the way forward. I don't think that's actually a platform we ought to be presenting to voters, even at this stage. Nigel has made it quite clear, in his capacity as party leader, if individual constituencies want to have those discussions, nothing more than discussions, there's nothing to stop them doing so. What he does appreciate, though, is that I believe the overriding sentiment within the party at this point in time is that there is no deal to be done and we're not interested in a deal. And further down the line anyway, how do you go out into the weeks prior to the general election, suggesting that one candidate coming from potentially 2 parties is going to be the sole representative available for that seat, that MP seat? What do you do? Do you toss a coin? It's a quite bizarre construction from the media to suggest that A, that's got any legs, and B, it's likely to happen.
So even on a regional level, you're thinking it's probably not possible?
Not possible, yes, correct.
Okay, and as my final question, Conservatives have worked quite hard over the last few years to shake off sort of their image as being the nasty party, yes, and Labour being the softer party. UKIP have sort of been given this card as being sometimes regarded as the racist party. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's fair?
No, and I think what I would say, and I'm delighted to see it, is that we haven't had the accusation of being a racist party now for months. I think that's a phrase, an adjective, an accusation that's been well and truly dropped, and understandably so, because let's take what's happened again in the last 24 hours. The Conservative Party coalition government having to remove those absolutely awful vans touring in London, inviting illegal immigrants to go home, call a number and then go home. As quite rightly, even the Advertising Control Authority pointed out that this was completely and utterly abhorrent and shouldn't be happening. So
that's not something UKIP will ever be doing if UKIP were to become elected, we wouldn't see signs saying immigrants go home?
No, we've made it very plain. We've said no asylum for people that are here illegally. And what we have said is that For those individuals that are here and can prove that they should be here and they have right to be here, that's absolutely fine. But we need a moratorium for a 5-year period to allow the UK to effectively catch up and start to better integrate those that are here. And thereafter, it has to be a controlled immigration policy, just as Canada has, the United States has, Australia has, New Zealand has. You know, these are very, very grown-up countries we're talking about. So we're not taking something extreme out of the air. We're just following a very, very good, well-proven, well-documented immigration policy that's available elsewhere in the world.
Okay, thank you so much, Diane.
No problem. Delighted.
Thank you.